Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 9th. This is the first K8s Infra meeting of 2019. Hooray! We're all being publicly recorded, and as such, I'm going to remind us that we're being held to the code of conduct, which basically boils down to don't be a jerk. Today, we probably have a lot of catching up to do, so there's some recurring topics to roll through on the agenda, which more or less represent old business, and then if we have time left over, we can talk about new business. So first, anybody here is this their first time here? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Chuck from VMware. I've had a couple of issues getting, sorry, there's a bit of an echo that just confuses me a little bit. I've been having some issues getting some AWS credentials for SIG projects, so I'm just kind of poking my nose into a lot of places to figure out how to get that moving forward.
Can you say more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm working on SIG cluster lifecycle projects, in particular the cluster API provider AWS. And one of the things that we provide are AMIs for people to consume, and we don't have anywhere to stick those right now. We have testing credentials. I don't know if those are the same credentials that we would use for AMIs, but I am guessing they're not.
Yeah, I would say we definitely don't want to use the same credentials for AMIs that we expect real people to consume. That I will reach out to some people.
I'm right now talking to Dan and Eeyore, and that seems to be going well. We'll see if anything comes of it.
Okay, cool.
That seems to fall at the periphery of what this group has covered in the past. I think we should address whether we do or don't cover it as part of this working group for now, but that's a new topic.
I would mildly say yes, but no, because, sorry, I'm going to mute you, Tim. I think you're the source of the echo. Yes, but no, because to me, this seems to be like, what are the best practices for organizing the credentials for sundry clouds for where we're dumping our artifacts? If AMIs are an output of a SIG-sponsored project, I feel like we, as the Kubernetes project, could do well to make sure that they're using something that's officially sanctioned and supported by the project. So much in the same way that I think we still need to kind of lay out what that framework is for GCP projects, we probably want to consider the same thing for AWS credentials / projects. Otherwise, I just have concerns that it's going to be a bunch of random AWS accounts floating around because people are talking to people, which is great, but not super supportable in the long run.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. So on AI review, I kind of want to punt over to Dims, if that's okay with you, Dims, just because I'm still kind of paging in context here. If there were any AIs you specifically wanted to address, we could do that. Might be less painful than me reading the meeting notes.
Okay. The first one was Tim had requested Hippie Hacker for an update on the Canary test. I believe there is some progress there.
Yep. So Hippie sent me a PR, which we've been through on a couple of iterations, and it looked really good as of yesterday. I had 4 or 5 relatively small requests for changes. He may have done them on his time zone. I haven't looked at my email yet this morning. Once those go in, or once that PR is done, I'll approve it. And once it merges, I think we can actually do a real push and start the process of flipping it over. I don't actually think there's anything else left to do for DNS, so we could actually activate the first real community-owned service on the GCP side.
That's awesome. Okay. So then the other one was, Tim, you had an action item for a 30-day alpha cluster. We did create a Google group. Justin did that.
Yeah, so actually Tim and I have been figuring out how to create the cluster with appropriate IAM rules such that it is sufficiently locked down. And I believe we got that working last night. So there is one, and I will share. Well, I think you can actually see it, Dims, although, again, IAM credentials are a little weird. But you as a member of the group Dims and nobody else other than Tim should be able to G Cloud cluster container clusters list and then get credentials and actually have access to it. But that
You
may
should
get,
go through the UI too, though, right?
you should also be able to go through the UI, yes. But and a good test would be Aaron, for example. You should not be able to. Although maybe as a Googler you can. I don't know.
I've not added anybody to this project except
Okay.
via the Google groups.
Okay.
Except for like Ehor, who's got CNCF,
Okay.
level access. And so I think the goal here is to, at every step, try to maintain the least privilege possible. And so Justin and I bumped our heads a little bit on some of the documentation that was not really designed for people who are doing least privilege on the creator side. They're designed for people who are doing least privilege on the user side, but not on the creator side. So we bumped into a few things, and but the cluster seems to be up. We seem to have figured out what the least privilege is, and we go from there.
Yeah. So let me know, Dims, if you can't see the cluster or we don't have access to it.
Okay. So when I get back from wherever I'm going, I will poke at it, make sure that I can see it, and ping you back.
And then, so did we identify a list of 2 or 3 things that we want to merge over first?
Yeah, the first one is the publishing bot. We'll see how that goes. And then we can there is 2 more things, including, I think, Justin, you have something that you wanted to push.
Yeah, I want to experiment with a proxy redirector for binary assets so we have stable names that are not based on the GCS or S3 bucket names.
That seems ambitious. And I would add to the list of relatively easy things to bring over would be like GCS Web, which is used from all the test bots. It's really just a simple web server that would be relatively easy to port over.
Okay. So GCS Web, publishing bot, and the proxy redirector. Okay. So those are the 3 things. Then what was the next one?
Before we move on, sorry, I just want to bump up to the higher level to remind us why we're talking about a 30-day cluster, right? It's a cluster where we're going to experiment with the best way to migrate these things, but it blows up after 30 days. So this isn't about necessarily saying we're going to move the production versions of things over. At least I hope that's not what we're talking about. And this is purely for experimentation purposes.
Right. The goal here being to figure out the groups and IAM access and how we feel like we want to manage those. And again, with least privilege in mind, and to figure out the general workflows and processes, right?
And automate something if required, like, starting all the apps in a fresh cluster.
Right. Yeah. And actually automating the cluster turnup, I think, is important. And all the things that we've done through the UI to make the least privilege operation accessible, we should actually take apart and re-script.
Either script or a document based on whether it's practical.
Yeah, right. So that, God forbid something goes wrong, we can go back and say, well, this is how it's supposed to look.
Right.
Because at this point, there was enough steps that I'm not sure I could reproduce it all right away.
Yeah, I'm just trying to set the expectation that this is
right.
like, we now support GKE clusters for people who want things. That's not it. It's like you two have actually signed up to do the laborious work of figuring out what the framework and best practices are, and that's the place you're going to play around with that.
Do we want to set a quarter end goal of being done with this process and ready to turn on the real cluster? Is that reasonable?
That sounds great. I think there's kind of a natural checkpoint of evaluating how y'all are feeling in 30 days, if the cluster is going to blow up in 30 days.
Yes, I wrote down, I have to make sure it is actually an alpha cluster because I don't think it was actually an alpha cluster, but yes, it's going to be an alpha cluster very soon.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, the next one was, I had to follow up with Javier about the promoter cap. I think there was some traffic on the umbrella issue. I'm going to go there and check. Maybe
there's been some movement on the internal side too. I haven't read the update yet, but I got a notification that our open source office is involved now in looking at making sure that the tool that we have internally is okay to be moved out, which is progress. Forward movement anyway.
Right. I think the pattern, I wanted to talk a little bit about the pattern. So are we still going to use the pattern where the images will be published somewhere and then we promote them to the golden repository, GCR? right?
That is the process. I think there's an open question about whether the original somewhere is a per project, like do your own thing sort of place, or whether it's do your own thing as long as it's GCR, or whether it's
The staging.
we'll provide a staging zone for you,
Right.
because that has permissions issues that are sort of fugly.
Right. The reason why I'm asking that question is right now, when we need to do the HCD stuff, I think, Tim, you get pinged a lot. Which stage is that? Is that direct promotion to...
You mean the CoreOS stuff? Or
yeah, the
CoreDNS
CoreOS stuff. Yeah, CoreDNS stuff.
All our words are failing today.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, they are doing their own thing as long as it's GCR right now. So they push to a GCR somewhere, or no, actually no, they pull from Docker Hub. Sorry. So that's a do your own thing wherever you want, and you tell us what it is, and we'll pull it in. That is a valid way to go, but I'm doing that through a script, not through the promoter right now, because the promoter doesn't handle arbitrary pull from any random place, because it gets more complicated with things like manifest lists, which can't actually be pulled directly. You have to like take it apart and reassemble it, at least as far as I can tell.
So we need a scripting to go from there to staging first.
Well, I think we need to discuss which path we want to pursue. Like if we told everybody, like make yourself a GCR repo somewhere, we don't care where, then it becomes easier because the things are already in GCR. And so the promoter tool can actually just sort of cross-reference them, and GCR will dedupe automatically. If it's pull from any random location, then I think the promoter will need to grow some more scripting.
Yeah, I think I like that idea. Let's start with that. We'll tell people that they should have a GCR repository where they can push images to. And then when they are happy, then they tell us.
The problem with that is the GCR registries in general aren't free, right? I don't think there's a free tier of GCR.
There is a free tier of GCR, but like in total, it's not free.
Okay, what does that mean? I wish
I mean, like there is a free tier, so you can use it up to some limit, but after that limit, you have to pay. As far as I remember, it's like 5 gigs of storage.
Okay.
I can double check that.
Yeah. So we should have this conversation with the people who are going to be pushing stuff, because 5 gigs will go pretty fast, especially if people want to keep their history forever, like they probably should.
Well, they don't need. They might not need to keep their history if it's reproducible, but yes,
that's also true.
Argument.
I guess if the staging is really just a staging zone and that they have a rotating buffer of recent images in their staging, then, but like CoreDNS today pushes to their Docker Hub repo, which is the CoreDNS repo, and we're saying we import it to GCR because Kubernetes feels like we need to have some amount of ownership of the image, but that's their repo anyway. Right. And Docker Hub for now is free, but will it be free forever? I don't know.
Right. Okay. At least there's a couple of things that we can do there. But for either one of them, we need the Google promoter kept to wrap up, right?
Yes. And this conversation needs to be had probably in the context of the KEP. The other option, I guess, that we didn't throw out would be that we create a staging repo for each project. That we own as part of K8s Infra, and we give the individual users. We create one for CoreDNS, we create one for Helm, we create one for whatever third-party projects are out there, third-party ecosystem projects, and it's ours, but they can push to it, and that way we eat the bill for it, and we manage the sort of ring bufferiness of it. That may be sort of the more sustainable approach, but we have to then find ways to define the process for who gets a repo and how do we manage them and where's the list of them, et cetera. And GCR is weird because you have to have a GCP project for a GCR repo. So we have many more projects created now.
I also want to draw a distinct line. Sorry, I'm going to mute you. So I want to draw a distinct line that this group is focused on Kubernetes related infra, not CNCF infra. So out of the good, even though like we depend upon etcd and now CoreDNS, this has nothing to do with setting up infrastructure for other CNCF related projects. It would be great if this is used as a pattern for them. just from the context of like how is our money being spent and why?
Agree. If we create a GCR for etcd, it's for etcd for Kubernetes, and it's not a public etcd. It's not where they serve the world from, right? Because if etcd has its own CNCF project, they need their own funding for that.
Yeah, and we haven't had any requests from them. So like what we're doing now is specifically for Kubernetes only. So Kubernetes community has a request to do that for core DNS at Kubernetes and etcd at Kubernetes.
Where I personally see more of the interest in people wanting places to put their artifacts is for projects from SIGs, like Cluster Provider API, stuff or whatever. One of those provider things that has the word AWS in it, and the reason Chuck is here. But I know like many people have asked about this.
So can we say this at least? For KK and K8s Infra, whatever images we currently have there, can we have one account, GCR account for that?
I don't know what all images that encompasses and who builds them. Kubernetes being this monolithic thing, has a lot of different stuff from different people. And I think it's worth exploring how to continue to grant individuals least privilege possible, just as a policy. So I don't want to make a blanket statement. It sounds reasonable, but I haven't done the work to look at that yet.
Yeah, Tim, it will still be limited set of people at this point.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're not going to give it to everybody.
That's true, and I guess KK is not growing at this point, so
right,
it's probably okay.
Yeah, the reason for asking that is basically all the conformance images, for example, right, and the images that we use in test infra. So just for those, okay. So
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
So Ihor, could you create one for that?
Yes, I can. I'd like to also I made a brief research on the pricing for GCR, and actually how GCR works. So GCR as a service itself is free, but for the storage it uses GCS, the Google Storage Buckets, and they are not free. So they have this free tier of 5 gigabytes per month, as far as I remember. Yeah, so 5 gigs of months of regional storage, and only in US regions. So if we're going to store this artifact somewhere outside of the US regions, like in Europe or in Asian regions on GCP, we'll have to pay. And there are also some limits on the operations and network address. But yeah, the key point about pricing is about the GCS storage for GCR.
Okay, so I will take an action item to create an issue with a limited scope. Who will be able to access this? So we can take some stuff off of people like XD who get pulled in all the time for cluster images. So I'll create an issue, and Ihor, I'll assign it to you. Okay, and then you can create an account for us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is the promoter KEP merged? I forget. Is it merged and looking for final approval or for iteration, or is it looking for final approval now?
I'll have to look.
That's fine. I'll find it in my email and follow up with Javier. And
yeah, it's merged, at least in the Kubernetes community.
But it's not implementable yet, if I recall, right? I think it was still in the whatever the pre-implementable stage was.
Okay.
I think, and if not, well, at least we have some details still to work out, and I'll try to close the loop with Javier. I don't know if he's back yet this week or not.
Right. Then the other action item was Justin, you and Brendan had to talk about registry mirroring, attestation, and the proxy stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, Brent, we actually did talk about it at KubeCon a little bit. We need to talk more about it, I think, in detail. But yeah, I've been mostly doing the bots, and I think some of that will come out of the proxy, and I want to do some experiments to see what's possible. And then, yeah, I don't know, Brendan, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the proxy is fairly well understood. Maybe tricky to implement, but understood. I think that the promoter process is the other piece of it. So I think we separated how are we going to serve binaries from how are we going to serve images. And there's a belief that if we can serve HTTP, that we can serve images behind the redirector. So that was sort of the agreement that we came to.
Did we write this down somewhere, Brendan?
Sure. Yeah, that was actually something I was going to ask. Was like, is this K8s.io? I mean, like, it feels a little bit weird that K8s.io is turning into like the infra repo.
It's not being used for anything else, so it might as well.
I guess so.
I mean, it was originally supposed to be the configs that went into running the site, so it was the YAMLs themselves. So it seems reasonably appropriate that it continues to go in this direction. I mean, we could move it to another repo, but is there real value to that?
No, I don't care. I just wanted to make sure that we're okay with the notion that this is going to become sort of a general purpose dumping ground for everything infra related.
Yeah, when it gets some legs, we can move it out, Brendan.
All right. Well, I will send a PR then, and Justin can review basically describing my memory of the conversation and where I think we're moving forward, and file some issues, maybe. Or maybe, I mean, I don't know. Do we want a doc or do we want like an Uber issue?
Your call. Whatever works for you guys.
Okay. I'll see what I feel like.
Okay.
Probably both. Probably both a doc to describe it and an Uber issue to track our implementation of it.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Then the other one was the charter, and we haven't gotten back to that, you and me, Aaron. So I will add a note to myself to go do that this week.
Yeah, ping me if I haven't made any progress, since I'm the person who authored the PR, but if you want to suggest changes, I'll push them. And that's why, like, yeah, could we... K8s.io, one repo. It's great. It's fine. Please don't start talking about code ownership and subprojects and stuff.
Okay. That's all I had in terms of the action items. Maybe we can scroll back and, see if there is anything that we haven't covered. I think we have to go look at the project board now, but I have to step off.
Okay, thanks so much for running the first half, Dims. That was helpful. I will run us through the project board just to remind us that's a thing we have, and I think it's a good practice to go through, and then I think we'll have plenty of time to talk about the 3 topics in open discussion. So just real quick, let me click the project board link and do a screen share thing. See ya, Dims. Have fun. Okay, thanks. Bye. Share a window that has a project board looking thing on it. Cool. So we sort of have 3 things. Oh, hang on. There we go. We have 3 things that are listed as in. First off, can everybody see this? I'm assuming we can. Okay. So I think we just pretty well thoroughly discussed the first 2 issues that are listed as in progress. I'm going to set up the GCS bucket for projects to use, because I think that's the proposal that Brendan and Justin are going to be working on that we just discussed. Is that right? I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to do the same thing.
Well, sorry, I was muted. I think it's, I mean, yes, that's a prerequisite. The idea is to run a proxier that can decide whether it's a GCS bucket or S3 or Azure Storage or whatever, depending on your location.
That's fine. I think what I'm trying to get to is this in progress column should have people assigned to issues, and I roughly feel like I got assignees for some of the stuff based on who was talking about what previously. I'll assign Tim and Hippie to DNS, and then we should probably figure out who to assign for the GCR related stuff, which I had Dim's name down. I think there needs to be more people than Dim's. Who's really pushing on the KEP? It sounded kind of like Tim. Okay. So this is Dim's and Tim. And this is not like voluntolding. This is just so there's a point of contact and we can eventually, the pattern here is somebody takes this over and shepherds it going forward. Thanks for being understanding there. And then DNS is HH and Tim. Okay, so I think that's that. The one thing that's listed as in progress is setting up an infra or setting up a billing report for all of our assets right now, which I was curious, could you tell us a little bit about that, Ihor?
Yes, I can. So I made a brief research, and actually, and my goal is to make the brief discussion here on what is our final goal of having these reports. From my understanding, we need the most detailed reports as possible. And also, we also need to have an ability to visualize that in some way for easy human consumption. So how GCP allows to generate the billing reports. We can export them as a BigQuery, and we also can export them as the CSV or JSON files. So CSV and a JSON file, exporting to CSV or JSON file is like a bit easier, but it also has some limitations because BigQuery is more feature rich. So if we really agree that we need BigQuery, I can set it up, but I also need some extra permissions on that because I don't have them at the moment. So with BigQuery export, we are also able to use the Google's Data Studio, which will allow us to generate some sweet graphics for the keynote at KubeCon, if necessary.
I think that's probably the right path. I've seen some demos of people doing really amazing stuff with Data Studio. So it sounds great. Ihor, you should have full access to the project. I think you're like project owner.
No, well, I'm a project administrator, so I have all the administrative access there, but I don't have the the technical ownership there. Like I love GCR, GCP IAM roles, which can be assigned extremely granularly. So I'm a creator. I'm org owner, but I'm not.
As an org owner, can't you grant yourself editor permissions?
I cannot. You can.
Okay.
You're the only owner there.
So, you should probably have as much access as there is access to have, because it's good for somebody other than me to be able to unlock the car. But secondly, it would be nice to try to set this up again with minimal privilege required and just to write the script down. So
we can do an experiment.
We can try to do this. Justin and I, I can do it with anybody who doesn't have full access, right? And so if somebody wants to sign up, we'll do the same thing. Let's go create a Google group that is this active actor and assign a couple of people to it, and then I will be the person who pokes the least privileged possible credentials to that role, and then we see if we can get it set up and used.
Yeah, I second the Google group. So I can create a Google group just for the limited set of people who may have all the.
Okay. So you want to create a group like K8s Infra billing admins?
No, it's not about billing. So I have an access to billing, for example, and Taylor Wagner from CMC, she also has an access. It's more about probably the platform admins, you, me, maybe I would nominate Deems and Aaron as well as the working group chairs. So just a few people who should be able to unlock the car.
Do you know which? Maybe I'm confused. Which permissions do you need? Let's take this offline. Let's have a chat or email, and we can get the list of permissions that we think we need and figure out what the right name for the group is.
Also, I want to say I like the idea of the BigQuery export because it feels like you can also then, I believe, export from BigQuery to CSV or JSON and export just the data you want, which would probably be better anyway. So I feel like we're not shutting the door on CSV and JSON either. And
actually, from within BigQuery, you can share individual data sets with other users. So we can actually enable people to do other things with it on a more granular access. So I think BigQuery is great. Let's just try to pin down what the exact role that we're defining here is, whether it's not the billing administrator, it's the billing report administrators.
No, so permissions that I need is to create a BigQuery. BigQuery artifact. So I have the full access to billing, but I have zero access to BigQuery. So to create a report in BigQuery, you have to have an access to billing and to BigQuery within this project. So I have an access to billing, but I don't have an access to create substance in a BigQuery world.
Is to create the destination.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to figure out if we should create, if the role we're defining is the intersection of billing and BigQuery, or the union rather, or whether it's just BigQuery, like the BigQuery admin's role, who can then do anything with BigQuery, but like if I don't have access to billing, then I couldn't set it up. I couldn't set up the billing myself. Let me go take a look at that myself and see what access I have with respect to billing. I think I do not have billing access.
You have everything.
I think I have project. Well, I'll go look.
Yeah. So like you are the man here.
The billing, I don't have billing account access. I only have project access, not org access. And the billing account is bigger than the project.
We can sync offline on that. So
yeah, let's sync up.
I'm not sure
I
we
want to
should
keep myself in
spend some time
limited.
with it.
I want to keep myself in limited privilege role too, right? Like I don't want access to things that I shouldn't have access to, like the billing account. I don't need the credit cards.
So my perspective is traditionally something like this, where part of the Kubernetes project, I would expect to see like a proposal document that describes roughly what you're planning to do and how you're planning to do it. So I feel like you're at the iteration stage where you're still exploring and trying to figure out what this roughly looks like. So I'm okay if y'all comment on the issue that you've given a certain person certain privileges to create the appropriate things just to get started, but we should have a document that describes what the actual roles should be. And we should view this with the same destructiveness as the 30-day alpha clusters, in my opinion. That said, I'm really glad we're talking about this now. I was sort of hoping that we could, new year, new meeting item, regularly review how much money we have spent and on what, because I kind of feel like that's going to be a forcing function for how organized we are in enumerating the projects and stuff.
I agree completely. That's why I made sure that billing reports was front loaded, that we didn't get too far down the road of building clusters and running a ton of stuff in them before we had a report for billing.
Yeah, so that's why I'm in favor of you two having whatever credentials you need to get something, because I'd like to understand, have we spent any money yet? And if so, what have we spent it on? And I'd rather we hear about that kind of like by the end of this month rather than being super surprised a couple now.
So prior to Justin burning away money with clusters, we had spent literally pennies on the DNS tests. So we're still clear there. Now that we've got real VMs running the clusters, we're going to start paying real money. It's not a whole lot because I assume your cluster is not very big, nor does it need to be in the end, right? Honestly, our utility clusters are only a few nodes. But yes, we need to get the reports started now so that we don't end up at the end of a year or 2 or 3 and say, wait, there's no more money left.
Yeah, and it'd be great to have the signing statements I think you proposed, Aaron, where we like just say how much we're spending. So like if you were to say the number was $1,000 this month, I would be surprised because it should be more under 100, I would guess, right? So like if we're orders of magnitude off, then like then we should think about that.
Agree, and it should be all public and on record.
Okay, cool. I'm glad we all agreed to that, and I really appreciate you and Ihor taking the initiative there.
Just if you're curious, we spent $1.25 since January 1st. It could be our first unofficial report here.
Sorry, Tim.
Tim, you're muted.
I lost what you were saying. My connection dropped for just 2 seconds in the middle of your statement.
We spent $1.25 since the 1st of January. So that's our billing report for this meeting. Hooray. Okay. If it's all right with you guys, I would like to move on to the, let's see. So just that's all in progress. Set up GCR repository. I'm going to go through and put names on that based on the agenda. And then I think that's pretty much it. Does anybody disagree? I'm kind of confused whether or not image promotion process or GCR repo is the thing. It seems like I want to talk about one of those as being what we talked about with respect to the KEP and GCR's repos.
Yeah, I think we only need one of those two.
Okay.
But they're both created by Dim, so I'll go look at maybe the words and see if he was making a distinction between them.
I will make an executive decision, say GCR sounds like umbrella-like to me than the image promotion process.
I would have go the other direction, but I don't care either way, really. I will get.
I think there's actually two pieces. I mean, I don't know if we want to split it, but like the two pieces are literally we need to create some GCR repos and decide, like what Tim said, about whether we're gonna give them all of the sub projects for staging, or they're gonna do their own thing. And then we separately have to figure out the process by which images move from one to the other. And those are two separate topics. I don't know that we want to. I mean, we can have an umbrella issue. I don't know that it matters, but that's why I think they're separate issues.
I don't know the granularity that we want to keep in this project board. It seems to me like that's too fine-grained. I think the create image promotion process encompasses the setting up of GCR repositories if we're going to do that. And I think one item here should cover both. There are two items for sure, but I think that the project board only needs one.
I will bike shed this.
I don't really care.
Yeah, I will bike shed this with Dims when we review our charter. Okay, I think that covers the board, though. I will stop sharing my screen. Whew. Okay. Chuck, why don't you talk to us about AWS credentials for SIG projects? And I will try to hear as nothing as I can and just take notes.
Sure. I actually have more questions, I think, than I do statements, but I can talk about the project a little bit. So the project itself needs AMIs, as I mentioned earlier, for people to consume, and we need an account or a place to put those, or it would be nice to have a place to put those. Right now, we're using some old HepDio thing that's probably going to disappear eventually after the VMware acquisition. And I don't really know how to get that, so I've just been poking around. This would be a great place to figure out what the status of that is. It sounds like there's a couple of places I can go to track this work. I think one issue that I've had is I don't really know how to find the status of this. This is not the first time I've requested something like this. About a week ago or so, I asked about GCR projects for the Kind project. And I think that there's some issue, I think it's K8s.io 158 or 153 or something like that, that's kind of tracking these general projects. I don't know if there's another place to go. This meeting seems like where I want to be to figure out what the status of that is. And it sounds like all the work that needs to happen is happening.
Chuck, can I ask a question? What are these AMIs for? I'm sorry if I'm out of touch. What are they holding?
Yeah, they're holding the Kubernetes like binaries, basically. So it's got the container runtime pre-built on it with the Kubernetes packages installed, like the dev and
these are AMIs for nodes of K8s clusters, or these are AMIs
to that's correct.
processes?
No, they are for sorry, they're for nodes.
So under what umbrella are we doing this? Like, that seems
the cluster
to me.
So the cluster API provider project is a SIG sponsored project. Do we, as the Kubernetes project, provide places for SIG sponsored projects to dump their sub-project artifacts?
Well, my argument is I'm not sure that we should be maintaining images of nodes, because that puts us in a perpetual security, node management role that I'm not sure we want to be in.
When you say we, the chain of responsibility, are you implying the chain of responsibility goes from the cluster API provider projects to SIG AWS to this group of people? Or
I'm not sure. I guess I haven't read a KEP or anything on this, and if there is one, then I just haven't seen it. It hasn't crossed my vision. It seems to me like I know how much effort the Google cause team puts into updating the base image and doing security updates and container runtime updates and integration testing and feature requests and changes and configurability. It's a freaking nightmare. I'm not sure that we want to take that on as community, or like we're going to be staffed to do it well, much less across all the different providers.
Yep. Yeah, so this is, I guess it's an interesting question of, I know Cluster API is a SIG sponsored project. I guess I assumed that because it's living under sigs.k8s.io that the provider AWS or all of the providers then are sort of SIG sponsored projects.
Yeah,
They are actually under SIG cluster lifecycle. Just as I recall, cluster provider AWS is under SIG cluster lifecycle, not SIG AWS for reasons.
For reasons, yes.
But yeah.
Either or, like I'm trying to understand if the burden of maintainability and security question, like I don't understand how that wouldn't generically apply to any artifact produced by any of the sub-projects within the Kubernetes project. Like
it does, but maintaining a Linux base image is orders of magnitude more complicated than maintaining a container image that has two binaries in it.
It's arguably not really. It's arguably not really. Like we could. So I think first of all we should separate out the AMI question from the broader account question. Like it feels like there is a need for artifacts living on AWS probably.
I agree with that, and there is. I totally acknowledge that there is a need for the ability to store images or something on AWS. In addition to GCP, and how we manage credentials and accounts is going to be something that I think this group should address. How we do billing there is something that I have no context on. I don't know if Amazon or anybody else is going to be paying those bills, or if CNCF will be paying those bills. I don't actually care. It's like I don't want the credit cards. But should we be hosting AMI images, I guess, is not really this group's problem. It's really some SIG or KEP or something's problem, but it's the first I've heard of us owning AMIs. So,
sorry, I don't know whose hand was up first, but I'll just say, like, I feel like Justin maybe has dealt with this already for COPS, right?
Yes, Team COPS, aka Justin in particular in this case, does maintain a COPS image, and you're not obliged to use it, so it is an optimization, but we do default to it. And I do think we have some scripts to do that. Another thing we could look at is automating creation of AMIs such that it is not a security burden. I feel like that is I guess then that again would come under this group, maybe, but it is a separate discussion from everything else. But it's not necessarily harder than building a Docker image, just that the commands you have to run are a little different.
Yeah, so we have that automated process using Packer.
Well, Packer isn't secure, so yeah. We should figure out a process that we want to use that we can. Yeah,
so security is a major issue here. I don't really know what we want to do.
That's the sticking point for me. Like, I do feel like I would rather be friendly to all of our SIG sponsored projects and provide them all of the needs they require for self-service, and a place for them to store artifacts seems ideal. Whether that then implies that, like, the Kubernetes product security team is now responsible for any security vulnerabilities found within any of the artifacts produced by any of the sundry sub projects is, like, where my concern lies. I would argue that I think they apply solely to the things that come out of the Kubernetes org and not the Kubernetes SIGs org, but I legitimately don't know.
I agree, and that is exactly the boiling down of my main concern. I don't think that the security team, which is a volunteer army, is equipped to handle security for arbitrary AMIs and Google images and Microsoft images and VMware images and whatever else images that are built from God knows where on God knows what OS.
Well, my dream is that we produce a process that takes a Docker image and adds a kernel to create an AMI so that it becomes one thing. But yes, I certainly think it is a broadening of their scope to include the kernel, for example, and to include something which is more exposed on the internet.
And I'm also wondering from a chain of responsibility perspective whether or not we can get away with saying, like, the security of clusters stood up by this particular cluster provider falls upon the group who created that cluster provider. So if it's an associated repo, so something not part of the Kubernetes project, totally sponsored by a single company, great, responsibility falls on them. If it's done by a SIG, great, responsibility falls to the SIG chairs, or does it keep escalating all the way up? I would like to hope it doesn't escalate all the way up, but I don't know.
It does escalate all the way up, because we just had this discussion around the dashboard, right? So like if nobody's willing to take it, it does escalate all the way up. I think we're actually a little bit bike shitty though at this point. I think what the real action item is to create a credential store. Let's create a credential store. Let's skip all of the who builds it and stuff, and then we make the credential store available to people so that they can store the right credentials. Because I can tell you right now, the public key or the private key that I use to sign the Java Maven packages for the Kubernetes client libraries is in a Google Doc that is shared between me and Mehdi, right? So like that's the state of the art for most of these projects. So it's just a step forward to move to a centralized key store.
So I hear the bike shiny thing. I just want to try and draw the distinction between the Kubernetes org repos and the Kubernetes SIGs repos, because dashboard was within the Kubernetes org. I could argue that Kubernetes org has too many repos in it that aren't actually core Kubernetes or whatever, but I feel like that's a pretty easy distinction to make in terms of what we are willing to officially support versus we are being friendly to our contributors and collaborators. Tim.
So I do think the discussion of whether we should have, I'm agreeing with Brendan, the discussion of whether we should have images, machine images or not is not the discussion for this group. It's probably SIG Arch or whatever SIG cluster lifecycle to start and then SIG Arch to escalate. I would like to say it's sort of the reason we set up this group is so that we have a forum to discuss the exact sorts of things that we are going to be willing to pay for. And I think be willing to pay for is a proxy for being willing to support. So, you know, if GCS Web goes down, I expect to get paged. If K8s.io goes down, I expect to get paged. If there's a security problem on K8s.io, I expect to it land in my inbox. I'm not sure that if there's a security problem in rando base image on other cloud provider that I expect this group to be responsible for paying for it. That's the mental map where I'm going.
I have more wide question. That's probably not a topic for discussion today because we don't have so much time, but maybe for the next time. So in general, we have the AWS-based infra that was sponsored by AWS, and that it's originally was created after the after the sponsorship by SIG testing. So Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. So we have the AWS infra that is intended to be used by Kubernetes community. The major question here is it the goal for our group here to manage all that assets or not? So why I'm asking this, because as with our GCP account, I'm also the primary owner and creator for our AWS account. So I'm not the person who manage like all the the technical stuff there. So SIG testing is responsible for that, SIG testing and maybe other SIGs, but I'm responsible for billing, I'm responsible for creating the new users, deleting the old ones, and so on. So yeah, I'd like to discuss that because I'd like to understand if it's still the area of responsibility for this group or not. Aaron raised
I think we need, so I'm acting as gatekeeper for sort of all things GCP in this migration. We need an equivalent gatekeeper for all things AWS and all things Microsoft. And anybody else that we're going to engage with on this sort of mechanism. If somebody came to me and said, I need to be able to store GCS or GCP VM images, where do I store them? I would have put the brakes on and said, hold on a second, what are we doing? So we need an equivalent owner for the Amazon side of things, and it can't be me because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Right. So I got approached by somebody from SIG AWS about why can't AWS just take care of this stuff directly? And I am very opposed to that. I really feel like coming through the CNCF and having open and public and transparent discussions here where we as a community come to consensus is a far healthier model for cloud providers to adopt.
This was the goal, was complete transparency in this. Every penny that is spent should be clearly enumerable by the community. And, like government accounting, bad example. We should be able to have a line item for every single cent that we spend, and there should be absolute transparency in this. So I agree with you on that, Aaron.
But whether or not mechanically it needs to follow the same model of a donation to the CNCF, and now the CNCF is managing the funds, but representatives from the cloud manage how the funds are spent. I don't know. It seems like it's a pretty clean process to me, but I do think that do the AWS credentials still work for you, Ihor? I felt at some point like they ran out of quota and there was a swapping of credentials and stuff.
Yep. So, well, credentials are working for me. Unfortunately, we have some issues with credits because we have AWS donated way less credits than GCP, and AWS is way more actively used today than GCP. So sometimes we may have like financial issues with our AWS account, but like we're handling that on the CNCF side. So like you shouldn't care about the billing itself. But yeah, like so that's the issues that we have today and that we may have in the future.
We are probably way off in bike shed territory, but just as a concrete example, like AWS wants to test EKS based on things that are pushed to Kubernetes repos in much the same way Google does for GKE. And so they need to use a special engineering only AWS account in order to do that, rather than a production off the shelf bog standard AWS account. And I don't think those funds are going through this group. That seems okay, but I'm not super sure about that. And that's not how I would want this group's funds to be used going forward.
I agree with that. And any testing that is being done of GKE will not fall into this group as long as I'm watching.
Yeah, as far as I remember, the same happens with EKS. So the current AWS account is used only for the community artifacts and that. So like it was originally used by SIG testing. Like the request from Chuck to store some community AMIs, if we'll approve that and we'll agree on that, so it will also land there. But it's not about the commercial offerings by some vendors.
Right. So that would be the path to keep in mind, that if Chuck's coming here and asking for a place to store AMIs and we don't want to do it because security concerns, and he goes and talks to the vendor directly and they fund that directly, have we like lost some of the transparency that would have benefited this project?
All right. So sorry, Tim. Just like my question was absolutely simple. So, does this group manage our community-related AWS assets or not? Because originally we created this group to manage our GCP infra, but we are managing it for community.
We created this group because we have a ton of GCP infra that we would like the community to own. But I think this group should own all community-related infra. That boundary is community, though, and that means that as we move the GCP stuff, the GKE gets left behind, and as we move Amazon stuff, the EKS gets left behind. That's Amazon's problem, that's Google's problem, and the community stuff is the stuff that's in the middle and is for everybody. I apologize to Chuck for sort of piling on and taking it in a completely other direction than you really needed.
No, it's cool.
We need to come back and revisit your actual question, which is, how would I store these things? But I do think we should explore should we be storing those things?
Sure. I'd be if you give me some of your concerns, I can try to talk to the SIG about it and see what.
Is there a KEP or a proposal or a doc or something that explains the plan and the life cycle management of these images and like who's going to take responsibility for them and those sorts of things?
I will need to look into that. I don't know if that exists.
Cool. I would love to see such a doc, and I think this is a big enough topic that it has to be written down and get some amount of consensus.
Sure.
And Chuck, if you wanna reach out to me as well, like as for someone that is stuck with the COPS images, like I will work with you on that type thing, and we can talk about the various solutions that are out there and why I looked at certain ones in certain ways.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cool.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So then, just to answer one last question, will SIG projects have GCR or GCS buckets to store images?
I think the answer is a qualified yes.
With Docker images or machine images? Sorry.
Docker images.
The answer, sorry, it's a qualified yes because we'll have to decide which things are being paid for by community projects and which ones are not, and we don't really have criteria for that yet. So let's assume that the answer is if a SIG approved it and SIG Arch hasn't objected, then probably yes. Whether that's a GCR that you set up yourself or one that we set up for you or a shared one, I think is TBD.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
And then the extension of that is once we have this mirroring stuff, then the GCR would get mirrored or wherever the original source of truth is would get mirrored to these alternate providers like Amazon, Microsoft, something in China, et cetera.
Yep.
I can't believe I'm about to suggest this out loud, but is this something I should have the steering committee talk about under the guise of funding CNCF, stuff like that?
Which topic specifically?
It sounds like we're still talking about the question of whether or not funding from this group should be allocated towards artifacts that come from SIG-sponsored projects versus core projects.
I think there needs to be a process for SIGs to be able to spend money. It can't be willy-nilly, or at least it's willy-nilly within bounds. So yeah, I think there has to be some process for sort of requesting funding here. So I think that is a steering topic. The AMI question, I think, is a SIG Arch topic at its top. But how, defining a process for how to allocate money is, I think, steering.
But in terms of, I think this group really is supposed to have as an output the ability for any SIG project to be able to host Docker images, for example, right? Isn't that
yes?
Them?
I think
that's I've been directed to this group while requesting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This group, I think, it owns the mechanisms and the should gate all of the, how do you store your image, where do you store your image, how do we set up the billing report, etc. I don't think this group has. I don't think the charter says whether we have an opinion on if you should store those things or not. That's a separate question, and sort of I don't know what the policy for that needs to be.
I agree that's a separate question, and as one of the organizers of this group, I'm defaulting to anybody who comes and asks can get it. The price they have to pay is the time it takes to actually implement all the framework and structure that we don't yet have in place. So if you're willing to be a guinea pig to help out with that, sure, come on down. Maybe later on down the line when it's a super frictionless process and we start to realize how much money we're spending, we will realize there is a policy that needs to be put together by the steering committee, but I don't necessarily think that gates us, just kind of servicing whomever asks. But I do agree the AMI question is a SIG Arch question.
Well, and as someone who sits in this and SIG Arch, it's hard for me to split my brain enough to say, like, yes, here's how you store AMI images without asking whether you should or not.
That's fine. I'm actually asking about an entirely separate project. If you've heard of Kind, which is Kubernetes and Docker, right now they're hosted on Docker Hub, and I think it would be better if they were hosted on a longer-term solution, which this group might provide.
I think that one is much more clear to me that it should be in the K8s GCR.
Cool. Yep.
So we don't have a promotion process for that yet. If it's valuable, what we've been doing with Core DNS is people point me at their Docker Hub manifest, and I import it into gcr.k8s.io sort of manually. I am happy to do that for Kind as long as you're not updating it every day, because it's a little bit of a tedious process. until the promoter is in place. Or you can just leave it as it is, and once the promoter is in place, we'll have this process fully documented.
I think Ben has whatever credentials he would need to do that, but I do actually appreciate that y'all are trying to be honest and do this the community way rather than abusing the fact that one of the folks who started it works for Google. So yeah, let's talk about that offline because that seems like a much clearer thing. And I have to run. I'm 5 minutes late for my next meeting. I'm sorry for cutting us short, late, whatever. But thank you for all of the healthy discussion, and we'll see you folks in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye, everyone.